One of the most important things you can do as a free-to-play Marvel Snap player, and just anyone who's not a whale and wants to ensure that their resources are being used effectively, you want to be patient when new cards come out, the spotlight caches roll out, because you want to see the metrics and how these cards are performing. So that's exactly what we'll be talking about today. Now, these are early impressions, but I think that it gives you an idea of how these cards are doing and whether or not you should be rolling your caches for Ravonna, Zabu, and of course, Jean Grey. Now, let's get started with Ravonna here. Now, Ravonna, I was a little low on, and of course I did release a video where I discussed how I had a pretty negative experience with it, and I thought that it was a little undertuned. On the Snapchat, I said that I would expect the card to be a 2 to 3 star rating, and then later on, like far in the future, as more cards are released, potentially a 4-star card, and that seems to have rung true. At 3,000 tokens, if you want to just buy it and you have the other cards, then maybe you go for it if you've saved up some tokens. But for the average player, I would not suggest getting this card. I also would not suggest rolling the cash for it. It has a negative cube rate, a mid 40% win rate, and a abysmal meta share at 1.9%. This card is completely landed on its face. As you can see, the decks that are being played right now, the most popular decks are running 40% win rates. We have one that's 52, and it's a version of basically boosted brood. So that was a good deck anyway, and believe it or not, that's a lower win rate than just standard boosted brood. So Ravonna makes the deck worse, and that I think is what leans me away from this card. Now, could it get buffed? Of course it can. Of course it can get buffed, but I don't have that information. And if your resources are valuable to you, I think you err on the side of caution and you save your caches and you save your tokens. Now, there's one elephant in the room that we need to talk about, and that's Mobius. Mobius is going to be coming out next week, and I actually believe this is going to be a pretty impactful card. Now, of course, in some matchups, it's a 2-3 that does nothing, but I think you're going to be building your deck to take advantage of this. And of course, it's going to absolutely hammer cards like Ravonna and of course, Zabu, which we're going to be talking about shortly. It can't be stressed enough that Mobius might be a legitimate factor in your decision as to whether or not to buy Ravonna. Overall, I would pass on Ravonna. I stated this yesterday and I reinforced it today. I think this card is a pass. Now, when we talk about Zabu, this is pretty interesting here. Zabu has the same issue as Ravonna, where it's going to be going up against Mobius, because Mobius is going to be pretty dominant for like 2 weeks, and eventually it'll settle in. It'll just be a part of, I think, notable decks in the meta, and you're going to have issues in those particular matchups if you're running a Zabu-based list. However, across multiple data points, not just one site or one source, across multiple data points, I was surprised to find that the win rate of Zabu has actually dropped. Some sites have it as low as 50%, others have it as high as 52%. On average calculated, it's 51.4% currently. That's not good. Its cube rate is also pretty horrible at a 10th. And so like it has a high meta share as well. So it's seeing play. It's just not performing that well. And a long time ago, I said that negative surfer deck was not good. And look at this. It's running a 48% win rate. Naturally, of course, the Spider-Ham, Black Bolt, Dr. Doom, these are all recently buffed cards for the most part. And I actually like Rockslide in this because Rockslide's not going to care about Mobius. So if you want Zabu, you at least have a very competitive deck here with a positive win rate, a good cube rate, and you can actually turn to. So overall, I think it's worth turning a couple caches for Zabu. I give it a 4-star rating, simply because it should be a 5 and it'll always be relevant, because any 4-cost card that comes out, Zabu's going to have something to say about it, right? But in the current meta, it's just not quite worth it. And of course, 3,000 tokens ain't nothing, and there's a chance that it drops down eventually in a series drop. I know what you're thinking, Alex, we haven't had a series drop in forever. Well, they got to come eventually, right? Right? I mean, I really don't know, but they have to, right? Finally, we have ourselves Jean Grey. Jean Grey gets a 3-star rating from me, and I actually lean more towards 2. The card still feels hard to play. Its only notable deck synergies are going to be the move-based decks, which are currently running Alioth, Snowguard, Silk, Jeff. They're running super expensive cards, including Jean Grey. So I actually kind of don't recommend you roll this if you're free to play, because Jean Grey is good enough. Like, the cube rate's good enough on these decks. Her cube rate is low. It's very low. Her win rate is okay, and the meta share is horrible. It's just not seeing that much play. It's not part of that many meta decks, and ultimately, these decks are so expensive that if you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out like where your tokens are best spent, it's unlikely you have all these pieces. If you do, then maybe you do the roll. Why not, right? But ultimately, I do think that Jean Grey is a pass here, and very notable is that it is coming back on January 27th in another Spotlight Cache, which kind of sucks. Like, they really should not be repeating, but they are. It'll be back, and maybe your situation's a little different. Maybe you unlock a couple of these cards along the way and have a little more success, and that's cool, right? Otherwise, I do think that Jean Grey is ultimately a pass. Now, that was a whole lot of discussion about this week's season caches. This is the most up-to-date data that I have available. We have another video right here. It's the podcast with Cozy Snap and I. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you in that next Marvel Snap video.